How has race, gender, and class changed in American society over time? By Alyssa Samowitz. Racism, sexism, classism. How much of America's history is based off of it? All separate forms of discrimination, each as an important issue as the next, yet somehow are all intertwined with each other. A person's race, gender, and social status all played a role in their advantages and disadvantages in life. Much of the ideology that America was built upon led to the continuous discrimination that is still relevant in American society today. As a new world was forming, the need for help was significant. Thousands of immigrants risked their lives to come to America to work in return for shelter and a chance at a new life. The arrival of these immigrants soon became known as the slave trade. Now the property of the Europeans, Africans soon began to be taken to America as slaves. The New World quickly stigmatized Africans to be seen as lower than the whites, treating them as if they were no more than property. Alexander Falconbridge's account of the slave trade reveals the harsh beginnings of slavery inflicted on those of African descent. The journey began with a medical checkup to make sure that the goods that the Europeans were buying could withstand such a brutal journey and an even more brutal arrival. The met Negroes, on being brought aboard the ships, are immediately fastened together, two and two, by handcuffs on their wrists and by iron rivets on their legs. Hardly any day went by where a Negro didn't die during their journey. Starvation, disease, and murder was nothing new for these slaves. Only 380 of the 500 Negroes on Alexander Falconbridge's ship made it to America alive. Slavery didn't discriminate against sexes. Each African female and male were both seen as property as they arrived to America. As the slave trade continued, many states slowly started the creation of slave laws. What was interesting about the laws was that it affected all slave men and women, but the laws, in fact, for men and women were not the same. The sexism rooted in the laws for slaves made it apparent that even as slaves, women still had more boundaries, challenges, and restrictions than men. These laws essentially made it illegal for an African woman and white man to be together. Here, we see the law that was created saying Negro women's children to serve according to the condition of the mother. The state of Virginia went against the common law that was used in Great Britain, stating that any child was a bloodline of the father's. But when it came to slaves, the state of Virginia changed it to the mother. The need for slaves was increasing at an increasing rate, and this law ensured the continuation of slaves by birth. While America was meant to be the land where people had endless opportunities to better their lives with dedication and hard work, the American society had other plans. A man's work life and home life said a lot about the person's values and views. Those values are rooted in the division between high class and low class. High class men had reliable jobs, a wife, and kids at home, the true American man. The values behind having a good job, good security, and good family is how the American society was intended to be. To keep the high class and high valued people at the top was seen as necessary to keep the American society flowing and growing. To ensure that, the American government put in laws in place to do so. One of these laws, the Sumptatory Law, was put in place for people whose personal belongings did not equate to them being high class. They were not allowed to wear certain fabrics or jewels. Offenders actually had to pay a fine in order to dress like the high class. Fast forward to the 19th century, African slaves at this point worked until they died, never saw their family, and had to beg for clothing and endured abuse. Slaves such as Frederick Douglass, who perfectly illustrated his life as a slave, shared the horrors that a young boy had to go through, with no hope for a better life in sight. His story was filled with abuse, whippings, beatings, running away, and knowing that his master was the father who did little to protect him. Frederick Douglass quoted, "I was seldomly whipped by my master, and suffered little from anything else than hunger and cold. I suffered much from hunger, but much more from cold." Yet, his story wasn't a particularly harsh one. This was the treatment of slaves, young and old. As the South continued to use slaves to build itself up, The North was booming with industrialization. Mass production and manufacturing created a lot of jobs and opportunities. Soon, the cities of America found itself overpopulated and full of people trying to make a living. This is where the rich and the poor had a clear division. As big corporations were starting, businessmen and blue-collar jobs became the high-class society, the rulers of the country. With so many opportunities to make it in the New World, the men were hard at work. Whether it was a factory job or an office job, a man's job was the foundation of family stability. With that said, women had to take the job of making life at home for their husbands pleasant so that he can take care of money and security. In 1842, Miss Catherine E. Beecher explained why this was such an important part of America's society. The Americans have applied to the sexes the great principle of political economy, which governs the manufactories of our age by carefully dividing the duties of the man from those of woman, in order that a great work of society may be better carried on. Gender roles were seen as necessary for the economy to continue growing. Unlike women in other countries, the women in America did not marry to be taken care of. They married to form a partnership. Women accepted these gender roles as they knew a man can best take care of a family's needs. In this decade, America had its Civil War. The fight between North and South over slavery was a victorious win for the North and the slaves. The slaves, who were now free, were far from equal still in the eyes of American society. In the 20th century, American society went through many transformations. Martin Luther King became the leader of the civil rights movement, who led demonstrations, preached his beliefs, and fought for equality for African Americans. Segregation was in effect in most public places like school, public parks, water fountains, and buses. During these times, one person explains, King's speech brought the crowd to life. With its simple images and repeat phrases, he said his people would not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. The violence and injustice towards African Americans was continuous, but at least now African Americans have the ability to make a change. And in this century, society finally granted full equal rights to African Americans. In the early 20th century, the Great Depression hit, and the structure of class became more visible than ever. Stock markets crashed, banks failed, and consumption in America was at a standstill. Farmers and factory workers went many months jobless and hungry, unable to support their families. While people in the poor areas of America fought their lives, people in the big city of higher classes did not suffer the same setbacks. The lack of help given from the rich to the poor at this time made the values and morals of different classes visible. While society seemed to be ever-changing in this time period, discrimination was far from over. The American woman had enough of living in the shadows of men. Regardless if a woman was a high-class, white-educated, she was still seen as below any form of male in the eyes of the law. The women's rights movement brought together women from across the country, fighting for their right to vote, rights over their body, rights over their property, and the fight to rid women of the stigma that their beauty and femininity should dictate their lives. In 1922, Rebecca Felton was elected as the first woman U.S. Senate. It seemed like women were becoming equal, yet men were still in total control over a woman's freedom. Women were still subjected to law after law forbidding them to be independent, like the Comstock Act that forbid women to use or be educated about any birth control. Until in 1916, Margaret Sanger took the stand. Only in 1950 was birth control available for all women. In today's society, by law, all are equal. Does that mean society is equal, or are we still bonded to the chains of discrimination for all those who still don't fit the image of being American? In the 21st decade, we have witnessed the first black president and a woman running for president. Does this mean that society is no longer racist or sexist? Today, whether African American or woman, most of your freedom seems equal as long as you're in high class. For those who are in a lower class or even middle class, society still views you as lower. 99% of welfare families are headed by women. There's no man around. In half the states, there can't be a man around because the AFDC says that it is that if there is an able-bodied man around, then you can't be on welfare. If the kids are going out to eat, the man can't get a job, then he's got to go. So, as much as we have achieved through all the history to make America an equal and a free country for all, discrimination is still there in society and in the law. So, let me ask you, at what point in history was America considered great? What time period are we now, under the Trump administration, aiming to go back to? I think that our greatest years are ahead of us, not behind us.